everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on the penultimate episode of Spy Family for Season 1. I can't believe it! But you know what's the great thing? We have one more episode of the first core, and then we're going to jump right into Season 2, because technically Season 2 comes out, I think it's October 1st or 4th, one of the two, but either way, it'll be able to come out. We'll jump right from episode 12 to episode 1 of season 2. Of course, everything's a week early on Patreon, so I'm sure that as soon as season 2 comes out, that's when it's going to start over on Patreon, and then for everybody else, it'll just be a week later. So, but yeah, I'm really excited. Last episode was hilarious. The whole thing with the dodgeball tournament. There were no Stellas given out, unfortunately, but there were also no bolts given out either. So that was great. But old Henry Henderson getting to watch the dodgeball match, Damien stepping in to protect Anya. It was super cute. It was hilarious. Billy, daddy. Like, it was just the best. I absolutely loved it. And so we're now on the penultimate episode of season 1, which is kind of funny because I imagine, I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't want spoilers for those of you that read the manga, obviously, but I was like, man, is most of this manga, I'm assuming that the manga is just about this operation to try to like bring these two countries together and to get a hold of Damien's dad. I'm assuming that's most of the manga. So yeah, when I started this series, I thought, oh, we'll infiltrate and have the whole thing with Damien's dad like in the first core. I don't think that's happening. I think that's going to be like the running thing with the entire series is getting to that point, and then what do we do after that? So I'm really kind of excited by that. I like where the possibilities of where things could head. That's really cool. It makes for a fun show and the premise of it. But it's going to be neat to see down the road, like, how things work out and what we do with that, right? That's going to be really interesting to see. And so I'm curious to see, with 2 episodes left of this first core, where we're going to leave off at. Like, where are we going to stop at before the second season starts? That's going to be the big question, because the second season has 13 episodes. So it's like 25 altogether with seasons 1 and season 2. So that's going to be interesting. But yeah. So I do have a few comments before we start. Annie Flowers talked about acerola, that it's a drink that is cherry mixed with apple. That sounds great. I've never had that, but I love cherries and I love apples, so that sounds right up my alley. I'm going to have to go look for some juice and that and try it out. Maybe have it for one of the reactions if I can find it. That would be really cool. And from episode 7, we had Damien. The idea of Damien in the dorm, is that going to affect Loid's plan? And I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, Damien doesn't live at home. He lives in the dorms, and I don't know if Loid knows that. So I'm like, how? It makes it seem like Damien does not go home often and does not see his family often, and they don't really care. So I'm like, how is that going to affect Loid's plan of getting Anya? You would think that Wise had researched that, though, and figured out he lived in the dorms, right? You would think that'd be a plot point. So how are they going to work that in with him seeing his family? I don't know. That's going to be interesting. But I'm pinning that to the back of my brain right now, that we're going to pin that back and think about it later, right? Ashley Penn talked about that in the manga for episode 8, Loid promises to protect Yor not from spears and meteors, but from bullets and nukes. Which makes a little bit more sense why Yuri was like, I don't know if I can measure up to nukes. Although meteors are kind of on the same wavelength. So I thought that was an interesting change from the manga to the anime. And then Alexander Q talks about how Loid picks up on Yuri right off the bat, but still doesn't know that Yor is like super more strong than an average person. But we talked about in the comment section, you know, just like with Yuri, there's the concept of love is blind. And Yuri overlooks a lot of things with Yor because he loves her. And maybe Loid is overlooking a lot of things because he has some feelings. I don't know. This is one of those series that, though, the main focus is comedy and not romance. So if Yor and Loid end up getting together, it's going to be like the last thing before the manga ends. You know it is. So it's just like, I'm trying not to get my hopes up and not be teased by this series, even though it's doing so already. So what can we do? And then Anya. So the show that Anya watches, we were talking about this too, because I think I said in episode 8 or 9 that, yeah, the show Bondman that Anya watches is a little bit dark. But then I joke, I'm like, this is dark for a kid's show, as my parents let me watch the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, as I watched Labyrinth, as I watched Return to Oz. That is like a freaking dark show for a little kid to watch. I watched a lot of dark shows as a kid, and I turned out all right. So I joke that Anya's watching Bond Man. It doesn't seem the most appropriate, but most of us, if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, we probably watched worse. So it's fine. But yeah, I also wanted to make note, and Alexander Q did as well, that it's probably a good thing that honestly, Bond Man, whether it's a dark show or not, it's probably even more threatening the fact that Anya can read the minds of adults, especially if they don't know that she can read their minds. So I think there's a lot more danger to Anya reading the mind of someone that may be thinking something really dark as an adult rather than just the show. Because at least the show goes through censors and through a screening. If Anya listens to an adult conversation, there's none of that there, especially if they don't even know she's listening. So that was worth noting. And then finally, AZ talked about how the show mainly takes place in like a form, like it's referencing Germany and talking about when it was split into two parts. And it was tied to Hungary and Budapest when it was two cities. It was Buda and Pest that was separated by the Danube River. And then later it was united, and that the wine is actually a famous wine from Tokaj, which is that's used in the show. So I thought that was really cool. So thank you, AZ. Thank you, everybody, for the comments. I thought they were all really good. Those were just ones that I wanted to make a note of. But yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this episode and see what the penultimate episode has to give us. Should be a fun time, right? So let's not waste any more time. Let's dive in and see. We're going to start episode 11 of Spy Family, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. So this episode, what an interesting penultimate episode for the season. I definitely setting up, I think, a lot more things for part 2, for season 2. I think the whole thing with Sylvia and Loid and their conversation is all setting up things that are going to happen for season 2. And there's little, I was talking to with people in the comments, because some people were talking about, you know, the more serious aspects of the show and kind of like the wartime environment and things like that. And I'll be honest, I don't watch this show to be serious. I mean, I do like discussing it in as serious as we can get, but I don't consider Spy Family like a super hardcore, dark, serious show. I mean, I feel like I watch this show because it's more happy and fluffy and wholesome than a lot of the shows that I'm watching, and that's what I love about it. But there is a little bit of an undertone there. It's just not at the forefront. I think the comedy and the lightheartedness and wholesomeness are at the forefront, and then there is the more serious elements that are kind of hanging around the background to kind of keep the show grounded from just being fluff. And I like that about Spy Family, but this episode definitely starts to paint those elements in a little bit broader strokes, especially the conversation of Twilight and Sylvia, as well as the very end scene with the dogs. That creates a little bit more of a grounded realism to it that the show has. But again, when I like to discuss about the show, I like discussing about the characters and about their motivations and stuff, and about the whole Loid learning to become a dad and Anya and them navigating this world. And we'll talk about some references in this episode because they are there. But in this episode, I do love that from the opening scene alone, where we have like what looks like the water running out of the faucet, and then we see Loid like looking at her grades while Anya's watching TV and seeing just how poorly she's doing in school. And Anya's clearly upset. Like, Anya is very embarrassed and knows that she's guilty. It's like when you go home from school and you know you have a bad grade, you just kind of try to like skid around it and be like, I don't want to talk about it. And Loid takes it very well. He takes it surprisingly well. My parents would have been a lot madder if I had gotten those grades. They would have been really unhappy. But yeah, Anya does really bad. Like, just has a 2 on one of them, has a 0 on one of them, has a 7. And I love in the background, we hear the TV saying, "No way, Bond man, this can't be happening." And it's kind of like reflecting on what's happening right now. For the record, I'm going to point out just a couple of things. I'm going to try to be as vague as possible because of spoilers, but there's a lot of references to Neon Genesis Evangelion in this episode. There were a few, and I was like, really? And there were a few references, and I was like, it was interesting, right? And I don't know if they were intentional or if it's just because I've been watching Neon Genesis quite a bit these last few weeks, but I was like, And one of them is that in Neon Genesis, one of the things that happens in the show is that you'll have a thing of dialogue happening, and then you'll have like something in the background playing, like a radio show or a TV, and whatever's being said in the background is kind of reflecting on the situation that's in the foreground. And that's a trope that is not just central to Neon Genesis, so I don't mean to say that it is, but it's just funny because it happens a lot in that series, and it happens at the start of this, which is interesting, right? And so Anya is clearly, she knows she's done wrong, and you see her in the foreground looking at the TV, and you see Loid in the background in the shadows looking at her with the grades. My parents would have been furious. I would have been grounded for weeks. Now, granted, she's only in kindergarten, but I don't know. I'm sad to say I was not a bad student in school. I was like a teacher's pet, like bookworm. Like I always wanted to make really, really good grades. My brother's polar opposite of me. He was just like, with school. And I was like, I wanted to do good, right? I wanted to be the Imperial Scholar when I was in school. My brother was like, not the same way. But he's like, Anya, and she's like, Anya is busy right now. Ooh, like, and it's every subject. It's not just one subject. It's every subject, like math, science, language, all of them are bad. It's like, ooh. And he's like, this is just awful. And then the lights come on. And Anya throws a little bit of a tantrum here. Like, she throws a little bit of tantrum saying that she doesn't want to study. And Loid just grabbing at her, like, stop running around like a feral child. And for the record, white t-shirt Loid, top-notch Loid. And him just being like, we made a deal. You agreed you had to start studying at 5. And she's like, like just screaming. I'm like, girl. And you're like, you demon, Papa is a demon. And Loid's like trying his best to put on the strong face. And he's like going over in his head the Operation Strix Phase 2. Where he's like, in order to attend the target social gathering, my daughter has to become an Imperial Scholar. Meaning she has to earn 8 Stella. She will need to get good grades in order to receive Stellas. But that's not the only way she can do so. It's not the only method, we find out. And so we're looking at these proverbs, and she just clearly hates it. And I like that, again, Loid is not a very good teacher. He's just not a good teacher. And he can't help it, right? Because Loid's profession is not being an educator, it's being a spy. And when you're a spy, there is this understanding that when you're in a mission, you understand the directions you follow through. And also, Loid is used to working either with agents who know the mission, know the protocol, and are kind of on equal footing as him, so he doesn't have to explain anything to them, or he's working with people that he is manipulating or using that don't need to be explained to in the first place. So it makes sense that Loid is not used to educating anybody or teaching, but some of the things he says in this episode, I'm like, that's not how you address a kid for that. I don't know. That's not how you teach someone when he's like, how many times do I have to tell you? I was like, if you're teaching someone, that's not what you want to tell them. That's not going to help them learn. And he's like, it's supposed to be, now he does say that's supposed to be an E, not an A. And then yours, she's like, oh, but Loisan, her math score is pretty good. I'm like, you're not helping either because you're downplaying the fact that she got a 7. That's a failing grade. That's 7%. So I'm like, they all kind of, they're trying to find their groove. They're trying to find their rhythm. And neither of them are real parents. It's all, a pretend family. So neither of them have ever done this before or taught or been a parent. So it's kind of like a big learning curve, right? So you can't blame them. But you have Loid on the one hand, who doesn't quite know how to explain things like a teacher because that's not his job. And then you have who's like, oh, this is fine. This grade's okay. And it's like, no, it's not. But he's like, it's pretty good. I'm like, no, it's dreadful. And she says, she tries to do the positive reinforcement, but there has to be something else there. And she's like, and then Anya's kind of like, he has 2/8 of his bullets left. Like, Anya's not buying it, right? She's not buying it. And Loid's like, is this because of the cartoon? Like, what? He's like, oh, that's right. The proverb is the same one that Bondman said in episode 16. The fact that Loid has been watching Bondman enough to know what episode 16 is and to remember the proverb, that says something. Although that does say that Loid has been watching the show with Anya this whole time. So that is cute. They have bonded over that. Or he's been watching it by himself to research. And she says she forgot. And he says, well, remember. And I'm like, she's 5. She's a little kid. Like Loid again, he's like, well, I remembered that. Why don't you remember? And she's like, I don't. Anya's like, I like the show, but I don't like it enough to remember the proverbs. He says, it's the episode where the guy with the sideburns appears. And Anya's like, I don't know. She has like, Anya's face is the face of the little ghost in Mario where it's like, it doesn't want to do it. And she's like, I happen to mess up on my mind reading cheat on this test. So Anya this whole time has been trying to like read people's minds to cheat. And she's like, from now on, I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out which classmate is good at what subject. And this part here, she says, and then I'll definitely get perfect scores. And she has like the creepiest little smile on her face. She has like the creepiest smile. But she says that whole thing about mind reading, she says, no problem. And she says, I tried sounding like Papa. Because she knows her dad's a spy. And she's like, he has been told to use any method necessary, even if it's underhanded. And she's like, well, I'm just doing exactly like he would do. And Loid's like, okay, it would be easier to make her score an A+ by using a backdoor method. But if she suddenly scores that high, it's going to look suspicious. It's going to look like she was cheating, and then she's going to be suspected of cheating. He has to make it seem as natural as possible by nurturing her basic knowledge. And if she ends up being shunned by her classmates, it'll affect her life at school. And so then Anya realizes, she's like, oh, he's like, I can't have her not wanting to go to school. And she's like, oh, so if I read everyone's minds to get hundreds, they'll all hate me. And she runs through the scenario in her head, which is kind of what ends up happening with the Stella anyway, is that they end up making fun of her and they call her a witch. Only in this case, they just, because they're little brats, they make fun of her anyway. And Loid's like, I guess forcing a study might be too rough on her. If her motivation remains low, her concentration won't improve and she'll have lesser chance of learning. He's like, a change of pace is important. And again, he's like, there are other ways to earn Stella besides academics. So I do appreciate the fact that Loid, as a parent, is realizing that, yeah, good grades are great, but they're not the only way to go, right? He's like, if she's trying to earn Stella, we've got other means of doing so. And I love that he's like, okay, right then. He's like, just slaps his leg like, okay, we can do this. He's like, why don't we take a break from studying and drawing? And she's like, oh yeah. And Yora's like, good. He's like, maybe art. Art is the answer. We'll go with artwork. That will surely solve our problems. And I love that her cow, it has like a human nose and cat ears and spots. I was with Loid. I thought it was a cat. He's like, oh, is it a cheetah? Oh, wait, no. Is it a panda? Now, panda I didn't get, but cheetah I was on board with. And she's like, it's a moo cow. There was one at school. I know, she's like, no art. Like, we're gonna just, I love the silence between them. And then he switches it over to music. He's like, let's play violin. And then she just breaks all this. I like that Yora's like behind the door, like afraid it's gonna blow up or something. And she like breaks every string. And he's like, there's always sports. Prince of tennis, right? And I love how she's going, whoosh, whoosh. Girl, I'm right there with you. And Loid's just like, this is the worst idea. And then she like tries to go over the hurdle. It fails. And it just falls up and then just cries. It's bad. And Loid's like, oh, come on, don't cry. And he's like, stay calm, Twilight. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I love it. I need to figure out what she has a talent for and to help her excel in it. So yeah, that's the thing. What is Anya good at? And it seems in this episode, it's using her power to help people. But that's such a dangerous game because she can't let people know about her power. So she makes it work in this episode. She makes it work. And it's actually genius how she goes about it. So she's good at thinking on her feet and doing that. It's just her like solving these crimes, but she's a 5-year-old. So there's such a delicate line that she would have to walk with this, but she could make it work with her powers. That's going to be the case. How can she do that? That's going to be the big thing to figure out. And I love that Yor just randomly had a jump rope, like she probably is going to use it to strangle someone with. And she was like, oh, now's a good time. She's like, it's a lot of fun. He's like, don't panic. It's not like Desmond is immediately going to make his move. it takes an incredible amount of time to begin a war. And so that's where the more realistic stuff in this world of this show kind of starts to creep in a little bit, because we have like the fun antics and everything, and then building the family, and that's the primary focus of all of it. But there is that undercurrent of, yes, there is a mission, there is a war at stake, there is all these more serious elements that have kind of been at the back burner. They've always been there from the start, but this show kind of, the comedy and the wholesomeness kind of takes precedence, and then the realism starts to creep back in, right? And here's one of those moments. Like, it does take an incredible amount of time to start a war, so he's like, we do have some time. But he's like, they want her to get 8 Stella in 4 months. That seems so unreasonable. It's like, I guess because they know that the gathering is going to be in 4 months, so they want her to have them all by then. He's like, do we actually have that much time? So he's thinking like the war might actually begin before 4 months. Like, even though it takes a lot of time to plan, it may happen before then. So, and then poor Anya, she's like, Papa, I'll do my best. And he's like, oh. She's like, now untie me. He's like, oh, right. But yeah, it's just, he says, Anya, let's go out tomorrow. An outing. Going out on an outing. Yes. So, meanwhile, we have the idea of the academics, the arts, sports, but there's one other way to earn Stella, and that is through community service. And now these kids look real happy to be there. The parents are just like, go and do this thing. So I guess this is the only place they could do community service around town. But it goes horribly wrong that Anya just, here's the problem. She's listening to her father like talk about all of these things. And they say in the past there have been many cases where students like, and then we don't get to hear the rest because he's like talking about like how the students have helped apprehend criminals, and they're older students that do that, or help save like people from a burning building, and they're again older students, not 5-year-olds. And Anya's just like, oh, I could do that. But in listening to her dad, she completely doesn't listen to anything that the volunteer woman is saying. He's like, we could use more personnel from HQ to act out these scenarios, but that wouldn't be easy to do, and it could put them at risk. Mm-hmm. So then, yeah, it'd be beneficial to learn the importance of community service. Yeah. And so I like the idea that Anya wants to help people and that she can use her powers to do so. But man, she is not fit for being like a maid or somebody that cleans or somebody who works there. And she's like, oh, there's a pool, which is a nice foreshadowing of what's to come later on, that she recognizes where the pool is on the map. It's a nice tie-in that Anya learned where the pool was, and that way she could go back to it. Nice. He's like, it's for physical therapy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, things don't go great. That we have the 3 roses, which kind of represent Anya, Loid, and Yor. Maybe she breaks those. And then instead of going in the library, she's reading the manga. I love that it's like Sherlock has the little sloth with the pipe, and that's really cute. And then the next thing that was kind of like Neon Genesis was that there was a exit sign that we show her going by. That's all I'll say, is that that's a big thing in Neon Genesis, that exit sign. That's something that is frequent in Neon Genesis. So I was like, okay, well, there's that. We've had those 2 things. Okay. And so she says she's one who does the job where she gives the doctor the scalpels, which is like being a nurse. And I was like, oh, that's cool. That'd be cool if Anya could be a nurse. I feel like it's a little bit of Yor coming through there, where she's like, I want to be the one to hand him the knives. And I was like, that kind of seemed like it was cutting it. And Lloyd's like, what? She's like, I want to go to the operating room. And he's like, no, come back. And then the nurse, she like runs into the nurse Ratchet equivalent, and she's like, no, you don't need to volunteer here anymore. You guys are done. So then we get little Kenji-kun, and he's the boy on the crutches and Loid just looks so deterred. He's like, we couldn't even volunteer for community service. He's like, we failed at that even. And so Ken, the little boy in crutches, who goes to the rehabilitation pool, and he's afraid about the water being cold. And for the record, dear friends, the proper, I don't know exactly the protocol here, but I'm like, girl, I would have shown up. I don't know how to exactly, what I would have done is, if I had been an adult in this situation, the thing you should have done was get a hold of one of the instructors and be like, hey, I'm going to go change. Can you watch him Because he seems like he's about Anya's age. He'd be like, can you watch him? I'm going to go get changed. And then once I got changed, I'd come back and be like, okay, now you get changed and I'll stay here and wait on you. Don't leave little kids alone at the pool, especially if they can't swim. And so, yeah, he goes to the adult pool and then he sticks his hand in and falls in. And this is where Anya, and I'll be honest, the animation on him like drowning and his eyes were like big and wide, that was really creepy. That was genuinely like a creepy imagery. And I have nearly, when I was younger, I did nearly drown once, like at a water park. Like there was a big wave pool and I got to where I couldn't like it was too crowded and I couldn't I felt like I was drowning for a second. And nobody, again, you, just like Loid describes, nobody knows because it happens so quickly. And oftentimes people don't even realize it's happened. So I remember being in that wave pool. And just like starting to go under and I couldn't get up in time to breathe. And I remember that I was starting to drown and then some guy like helped pick me up and yeah, nothing ended up happening. But for a split second, I was like, so when this kid's drowning, yeah, that's terrifying. And there's often, especially in his case, he can't move his legs. There's not much he can do about it. So I want to talk about her going to Loid though, because he's like, the bathroom you just went. She's like, no, the pool. And she said, someone's drowning in the pool. And he's like, how do you know that? And he's like, exactly, who are you? And she's like, oh. And she's like, oh, shoot. She's like, I can't. And she hears him saying help. And she's like, I can't tell Loid that I can read minds. And she's like, Papa. And she's like, Anya's terrible at volunteering. And she's like, so I decided to become a pro swimmer and get stars. But like she has to think on her feet in that moment. She's like, she can't tell that she's a psychic. So I don't know. I wonder, obviously it happens in the spur of the moment. And Loid doesn't think anything about it. But I don't know. If I was Loid, I would maybe think back on that moment and be like, how'd you know that kid was drowning? But again, it's one of those things that in real life, you don't think anything about it, right? So it just is what it is. But Anya goes past that woman to go to the kid. And I thought she was going to tell, and she tries to act. She's like, oh, the pool, how fun. Like she tries to make it convincing that she's there and that she didn't overhear this kid drowning. And then she like runs around trying to find him and listening to him. And everybody's like, what is going on? And she's like, where's the drowning person? And then she hears and sees the bubbles. And I thought she was going to like tell an adult like, oh, look, there's bubbles, go over there. But she just jumps right in. She jumps in to try to help him. And then I love that shot of her like about to the water. And then Loid ends up saving the both of them. I love it. Like he ends up pulling them both out of the water. Oh, it's so good. And I love it. And then, yep, Ken's saved. And then they end up thanking her. And then, yeah, Loid says, yeah, children tend to drown more quietly than you would expect. Which, how he knows that is a little bit scary because he doesn't have to explain. He says many die because no one notices that they're drowning. Which is just like a little dark fact that Loid just happens to know. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, good job for noticing. And she's like, oh, I saw bubbles. Mm-hmm. So Anya gets the star, right? She gets the star for rescuing the boy and has the little badge on it. It's great. And she's the first in their class to get one. And I love that Becky, you see Damien like watching from afar, like being like, I love that Becky is so supportive. I'm like, Anya, do not get cockier on Becky. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But she's like, oh, you're amazing, Anya. You're one of the first graders to get one. I love that Henry is like, ultra amazingly elegant, Miss Fortune. Ultra amazingly elegant. And she's like, I'm so proud of you for some reason. I love Becky's like, I'm so proud for whatever reason. Well done. And Damien's like, ugh. He's like, she beat me. Of course. And so everybody's happy for her. And the little kid, I love the little kid waves like from his wheelchair at her. And she waves back. It's so cute. And they're all so proud of her. It's great. And Anya, her being like so happy. And so we get the little task. He's like, I love yours, says I'm going to make a feast for you today. And Anya's like, I'd rather my dad cook. And yours like, oh, the shock. I love that yours like shock. And she says, Stella needed to become an Imperial Scholar. 7. Tonitrus bolts until expulsion. 7. Which means they don't cancel each other out. Good. Everyone's respect plus 100. Aww. So then, again, we have a little bit of the seriousness of the show creep back in on the train and them sitting next to each other. Again, little Neon Genesis thing. Lots of things that are more serious in the show happens on trains. That's all I'll say. But again, it could have happened anywhere. That could be just a little nitpicky thing. But I think of all places for them to meet and talk in private, on the train. I don't know. I wonder if the director of this episode was on staff with Neon Genesis. I just wonder. It'd be curious to know. And so you didn't recognize Sylvia, so she's really good at the disguise. I like it. And Loid, you know, because of the eyes. That's the only way that you know. And so they're on the train, like, setting up. Couldn't we set something up with other agents to fake whatever you need to get the other Stella? And Loid's like, well, we could do that, but people would get suspicious. And we can't take risks that could potentially lead to the identities of other agents being exposed or get them arrested. And she's like, that's true. So he's like, as much as I'd like to cut corners, he's like, that's not a good idea. And he's like, why? Are they panicking at HQ? And she's like, no, they're not panicking. But there are a lot of businesses surrounding Desmond that seem to be engaging in shady financial dealings lately. Like, we can't get too laid back. Things are in motion. We need to make contact as soon as we can. And I love that. So Sylvia, again, talking about how these people clearly are not used to working with kids. She's like, oh, just give her some candy or something to get her motivated. That'll work. Give her some candy. That'll help her grades. Yep, sure thing. But so her going to school and then Anya. So Anya kind of gets a little bit where all the kids are like talking about her saving the kid and her getting off the bus with the Stella. And they're talking about her like, oh, did you see that girl from the class? Now, these are not her classmates. They're the other upperclassmen, right? And I love Anya has like little thing like, oh, I got something good. And they're like, oh, is that the girl that suddenly got a Stella? And they're all the older kids talking. It's a new record. I heard she rescued someone. The star's so brilliant. That's how I stand out now. And she kind of lets it go to her head a little bit. And I was like, Anya, be careful. Be careful, girl. Like, it's good that you're happy that you did something good. That's totally fine to be proud of it. But don't forsake the friends that you have just because of that. Because when she says good morning and Anya's like, call me Starlight Anya. I'm Starlight Anya now. And Becky's like, okay. She's like, sure. Becky's a very good friend. Because I'm like, Anya, don't let it get to your head. Becky's being really nice to you. Don't mess it up. Because then a lot of the kids, she's like, you're like a celebrity now. And everyone looks up to you. You might make 100 friends, which is not what ends up happening. And then I love in this episode, Anya's scenarios of how she thinks everyone's going to be. Like, she has a scenario of Damien, and she's like, oh, I see you in a new light. Be my friend. And I love that he's taller in her vision. Like, his pants are taller and his socks come up. Like, she imagines him taller than he actually is, which is kind of cute. And he's like, you could totally come over to my place with your dad. And then I love that they come over, and he's like, Anya, the mission is now a success. And she's like, yes. And they see the world, and it says world peace. And everybody's clapping for her and cheering and congratulating her, which, again, all I'll say is it is a Neon Genesis thing. That whole scenario, it just ties Neon Genesis. So maybe the director had something to do with the series, and they passed it on to this. The motion, the clapping, the world, it's all connected. Mm-hmm. But then we come back to reality, and Damien's like, don't get a big head. And then I love her face where she's like, if you've ever read Yona of the Dawn, Kusanagi, who's the mangaka for that series, Kusanagi likes to draw her characters whenever they have like those beady eyes, like those narrow eyes. She draws them like that. It's really cute, but I love it. And she's like, I'm like, what's their problem? They make me so mad. That didn't go as planned. The world is in peril. Super cute. And she says, let's go, Starlight Anya. She's like, okay. Becky's a good friend. She really is. But yeah, all the kids, they're like all jealous of her and they're talking smack about her. They're saying that she might have pushed the kid in. Like, they're being really mean, right? But a lot of little kids in grade school are like that. And like Becky said, they're just jealous of her. She shouldn't have to pay attention. And they try to get Damien in on it too. And Damien actually stands up for Anya. She's like, no. She's like, do you think the school just gives them out willy-nilly? He's like, do you think that she had to cheat to get one? Like, basically, he's like, quit making fun of her, right? He's like, it makes me mad that she got it before me, but I'm not going to make fun of her. And I love that Emil and Ewan are like, he's so manly and cool for being like, just like the coolest guy. I'm like, Damien is actually a good kid. I like Damien a lot. He's great in this series. He's just so frustrated that Anya got it before him. And Becky's like, he looks more earnest than he looks. Yeah, he is. It's great. And so then we go to the cafeteria, and Becky brings up the idea of getting a reward because she did well. And Anya's so simple. All she wants are peanuts. She's like, I just want some peanuts. And she's like, She's like, when you work really hard on tests or contests, you get a reward. And she's like, what do you want? And she's like, oh, it can be something bigger than that. And I love that Becky's like, on the test the other day, I got them to buy me a cute little dress and a tiara. And Anya's like, she's like, that doesn't really seem like it. And she says, but I mean, I guess they haven't given me that much. And they've given her the doll, a cake with a bomb, an airplane, jet fighter pilot, and a tank that's pink. Oh my God, I love that her dad's just standing there. I love the cake with the bomb on it. That's really cute. And she's like, is your family part of a secret organization that pulls the world's strings? Because that's how Loid's described it. And she's like, oh, what? No. She's like, no, they run a perfectly legitimate company. But she blushes a little bit. So I'm like Anya's taking some things that her dad has told her and applying it to her school, you know? And she's like, come on. She says, Anya wants a castle. And Becky's like, well, that might be a little bit too much. And she's like, what about a dog? And Anya's like, oh, a dog. She's like, I think her Weasel is, or Weisel. She says, Weisel is my happy little dog. I guess it's Weisel. And she's like, that's my puppy. And of course, Becky has a Yorkie. And she calls it Wheezy. I'm like, oh, that's cute. I like that she has a Yorkie. Oftentimes, the dogs that you have say something about your personality. And so her having a Yorkie makes sense. And then Anya asks, do you have a dog too, second son? Like, she doesn't call him Damien. And he's like, a dog? And she's like, what are you asking that jerk for? And then Damien, he has Max, who's a German Shepherd. Makes sense, right? And I love it. He's like, Max. Again, he's super tall in her vision. And he's like, who cares? Like, he doesn't want to tell her the answer. But Anya saw in his mind. And so she has like a little Shih Tzu. That's hers, right? That's what that little dog is, or a Maltese. And I have a dog, and he's like, oh, cute. Let's see who's cuter, yours or my Max. Oh, she has like a little Maltese. Bring it over to my place, and your dad too. And then that brings back the whole thing of world peace. And we see his dad, and he's like, well, hello, Mr. Forger. And I like that we see Damien in the vest with Max there. He's like, well, hello, Mr. Forger. And he says, let's stop this war, Mr. Desmond. And then world peace. And it's great. And so the world was at peace. Like, Anya just thinks it's that simple. And she's like, hey, and Damien's like, what the heck? So she asks for a dog, right? And Loid, it's funny because, you know, does a lot of the positive reinforcement, but Loid caves real easily. Loid, like, when she said she wanted a silencer, Lloyd's like, I think we can find that, you know? And now she's like, I want a dog. And he's like, well, I think we can get a dog. Like, he easily caves, right? But Yor is surprising, like, I don't know. I like that Yor's like, having an animal is a huge responsibility. It's another life that you take care of. She's like, it's a living creature and it requires a lot of work. And she's like, it's a very big responsibility. And Anya's like, really? And she's like, plus, and I like that Lloyd's like, well, yeah, I thought of that too, you know? He's like, a dog, huh? Yeah. He's like, we could discuss it a bit further. And Yor's like, really? And he's like, a properly trained dog could prove useful in securing the house. And then Anya's like, oh, that's why you want it? So it could be a security dog? Oh. And then Anya, and then Yor's like, dogs are so violent, though. I love that she's like, when Yor's talking about how violent the dog is, she's like wistfully staring off in the distance. She's like, I'm terribly worried one might rip her to shreds. And Anya's like, what? It's like a Doberman. And she's like, I want a tiny puppy. She's like, I want a tiny dog, not a big buff dog. And he's like, oh, sure, okay. And then Yor's like, yeah. And we see Yor, and imagine like a little terrier slicing her neck. Oh my He's like, I'm sure we can find a small dog that's still capable. We'll see if HQ can get us one later. The headquarters can get us one. Let's stop by the pet shop. So then we go to the shady pet shop, or wherever this is, right? So they're saying, did we get a buyer yet? And saying things are pretty tough right now. This part, interesting. We got some punks who think they're revolutionaries. And so they say here that they're going to use them as bomb dogs. These guys sure have it rough. Getting tinkered with so they can end up as toys for some humans. So they're literally going to have bombs put in them? I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Nope. I am a dog person, so I'm like, no, not having any of this. And so then we see, it's like they don't look that smart. But then they're like, do numbers 3 and 5 look weaker to you? Hell if I know, who cares? So we see this one dog, this white dog. And the white dog, like, has, like, visions of the future? Like, this one white dog, like, is able to see the future because it sees Anya and Loid and you're there? This big white dog? What? I'm so curious. This big old white dog. Like, what? And then we cut to seeing it's not one of the dogs that Anya picks out. She picks out a fox terrier, which is interesting that she picked that one. She's like, or this one. And she's like, oh, thank goodness. They look very weak. I love that yours, like, they don't look like they'll kill you. And Lloyd's like, no, wait a minute. That's interesting, though. And she has the peanuts on the tray. That's really cute. They did give her peanuts. That's awesome. So, yeah, that's the episode. So I'm very curious to see how that's going to go. How that's going to work with Anya getting the dog. The dog in the kennel did not look like a fox terrier, though. So that's going to be interesting. But apparently it's kind of clairvoyant. So why not? But we have one more episode left of the season. One more episode left of the season. And then we'll go right into season 2. So we won't even have to take a break, which is pretty exciting. So yeah, I'm ready to go. I hope you all are too. So in any case, I'm excited. So I am curious to know your thoughts down below. Please no spoilers, but I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week with the season finale of Spy Family. Bye.